Good morning. Welcome. And welcome to this circle that gathers us this morning. We come as we are. Some of us are celebrating. Some of us are grieving. Some of us are grumpy. Some of us are grateful. Some of us are welcoming more light in a new season. Others are hanging on, hoping for what has been. And so we come, just as we are, whoever we are, into this circle that holds the diversity of our experience, our cultures, our ways of making meaning and understanding life, our languages, our ethnicities, our sexual orientation and gender identities, our ages and stages of life. And it matters that each of us have chosen to take our place in the circle today. We each have a place, a unique place. And we're welcome whether we've never been in this circle before, we haven't been here for a long time, or we usually help give shape to this circle. We gather in this ancient configuration, a formation of circle for storytelling, for conversation, for learning, for listening, a formation of equality, that which is without hierarchy, and a circle that's never closed, can always be expanded. We gather with gratitude on this storied land, the ancestral lands of the Cree peoples of Treaty 6 and the Métis people who've made their home here for generations. And as we gather, we honor the culture and traditions and spirituality of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and we acknowledge our responsibility to be partners transcending the wounds of our history and seeking together healing and reconciliation. We're in the midst of a series of 7 Sundays in which we're focusing on the values that have been passed down as 7 sacred teachings in many Indigenous communities, some places known as the grandfather's teachings or the elders' teachings. These are 7 virtues, 7 natural laws that have been foundational in many teachings of Indigenous peoples. And each week we've been receiving with gratitude the work of our Aboriginal artist whose name is Arthur Gallant, who lives here in Edmonton, whom we commissioned to create a series of panels honoring these 7 sacred teachings. We've explored together humility and truth, respect and honesty, and today we focus on courage. And as we gather in this time and place, seeking truth, may we celebrate with each other all that has shaped our living and find courage for the living of these days. As we light this candle, we acknowledge that sometimes light is just a mere flicker, just a spark of possibility, a small flicker of energy. But we light this candle reminding ourselves that life does depend on light. Sometimes the light is so bright, as it was this morning with the snow, that it hurts our eyes. And sometimes the darkness is so deep that it's really hard to detect any light. Sometimes it takes courage to open our eyes. We come together to share the light we find in story and song, the light of our hope and our prayers, the light of this new day into which each of us was born to shine. Making music is one of the ways we pray. Trying to shape words around our experience is another one of the ways we pray. So I invite us to offer these words of Stan Mackay, who was a moderator of the United Church of Canada, the first Aboriginal moderator, a Cree man from Manitoba. And as we have been exploring these 7 sacred teachings, we have been offering Stan's words as we gather with one another. And so we pray together. We come with thanksgiving for our very breath, the warmth of sun and sustaining waters, for life all around us, the plants, soft grasses, and sheltering trees, for the ones that crawl, those that swim, and those that fly, for the 4-legged and the 2-legged, all our relations. We celebrate the diversity in creation as reflected in the 4 winds from the 4 directions. We especially honor the many people with their many gifts for understanding our shared life on the earth. We strive to live out the 7 sacred teachings: respect, love, honesty, courage, humility, wisdom, truth. These teachings enable us to live in harmony with ourselves, with our neighbors, and with all the created earth. May it be so. Amen. This is carpet time, and it's for the small, the tall, it's for anybody who wants to come a little closer to share a story, to see some pictures, to have a conversation with each other. So come and join us. Welcome, everybody. We're going to talk about courage today. And I don't know about you, but when I think of courage, I think of those great big things people do, like running into a burning building and saving everybody in the building. But sometimes, courage is a whole lot smaller than that. Sometimes it's just as much as trying to make a new friend, or going into a new classroom for the very first time. Here's somebody doing something courageous. Can you see him up on the screen? He's actually checking out something new. We do that a lot, and it takes courage. Here's somebody else trying to find courage. This kitty must know that there's things that would be a whole lot easier to do if he were big and strong and roaring like a lion. So here's a little story about courage, written by a guy named Bernard Waber. And the pictures are up on the wall too. There are many kinds of courage, awesome kinds, and everyday kinds. Still, courage is courage whatever kind. Courage is riding your bicycle for the very first time without the training wheels. Courage is a spelling bee when your word is superciliousness. What the heck does that mean? Courage is having 2 candy bars and saving one for tomorrow. Courage is mealtime and desperately hoping it's not chunky chunks in the real gravy again. Courage is nobody better pick on your little brother. And courage is it's your job to check out all those noises in the house. Courage is being the new kid on the block and saying flat out, "Hey, my name's Wayne. What's yours?" Courage is tasting the vegetable before you make a face. Courage is not peeking at the last pages of your whodunit book to find out who did it. Courage is being the first to make up after an argument. Courage is deliberately stepping on the cracks in the sidewalk. And courage is bottom of the ninth to tie score, 2 out, bases loaded, and it's your turn to bat. And courage is that juicy secret you promised never to tell. Courage is being sudsed and scrubbed by strangers. Courage is breaking bad habits. And it's remembering a silly joke and trying not to giggle when everyone else is being terribly serious. And courage is arriving way too early for the birthday party, being the very first one there. Courage is sending a Valentine to someone you secretly admire and signing your real name. Courage is admiring without picking the flowers. Courage is going to bed without a nightlife. Courage is deciding to have your hair cut. Courage is trying to cover up your mean, jealous side. And courage is a scenic car trip and being stuck in the middle of the best part. Courage is explaining the rip in your brand new pair of pants. And courage is going on that roller coaster again. Courage is, if you knew there were some mountains, you'd definitely climb them. Courage is exploring heights and depths. Courage is a blade of grass breaking its way through icy snow. And courage is starting all over again. Courage is holding on to your dream. Courage is being a firefighter or a police officer. And courage is sometimes having to say goodbye to someone we love and wish they weren't gone. And courage is what we give each other. It's one of the reasons we come here together every week, to learn how to be courageous, to practice, and to find courage for all the things we'll need it for this week. Thank you for coming, for sharing the story, and this is your time now for Kids Spirit.
Here's a reading from the Gospel of Mark, starting in chapter 4. It's a story of Jesus and his disciples. On a day when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let's go across to the other side of the sea." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat. And other boats were there with him. And it was at that moment that a great gale arose. The waves beat into the boat so that the boat was being swamped. As everyone showed concern, Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him up and they said to him, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" He woke up and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And then the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And Jesus said to them, "Why are you so afraid? You still don't trust, do you?" And at that they were filled with great awe. This is a story from the first century Jesus tradition. May we find wisdom for our living. And another reading, The Fox and the Lion. There was a pious man who wanted nothing more than to succeed in life. Then one night he dreamed of going into the woods where he would gain all understanding. So the next morning he did just that. He went into the woods and wandered for several hours looking for some sign that would provide answers. When he finally stopped to rest, he saw a fox with no legs lying between two rocks. Curious as to how a legless fox could survive, he waited until sunset when he observed a lion who came and lay meat before the fox. Ah, I understand, the man thought. The secret to success in life is to trust that all my needs will be taken care of. All I have to do is trust and surrender. 2 weeks later, when the man was weakened and starving, the man had another dream. In it, he heard a voice say, "You fool. Be like the lion, not the fox." This is a parable in the Sufi tradition. May we find wisdom for our living. The novelist William Faulkner understood the value of courage. He understood that to be courageous implies some sort of taking of a risk, stepping foot into the unknown and pursuing a good even when it might send us into an uncomfortable place. He said, "You cannot swim for new horizons until you have courage to lose sight of the shore." Our tradition is filled with stories of courage. Prophets and ordinary people willing to stick their necks out to speak words that needed speaking at a particular time. Acting what needed to be done at a particular time. Stories of Jesus that speak to power as embodied in his religious tradition. And the Roman occupiers, those who would accuse him and try him as a criminal. But in all these situations, these figures were portrayed as displaying a courage that stood in the face of power, that spoke when others could not, that cut to issues of communal health and wholeness and freedom and depth. We could name all these names of those in our spiritual tradition that are the big names of courage. We could name Moses and Joseph and Esther. We could go outside our tradition into our culture, into our world, and name countless others. King, Gandhi, Desmond, Milk. All those names with big capital letters. But any discussion of those whose names are remembered like that has to recognize the same potential, the same stuff in each of us. We can ponder on a morning like this the courage that we all require, because it takes courage to make it through this life. Nothing speaks it better than that children's story of all the simple ways that we all need courage, simply between waking up and going to sleep at night. We find sometimes we have enough of it, and at other times that we're just a little shy. We live lives where at times we've done big things when big things were required. Let's name a few, why don't we? The courage to forge on in the wake of the death of someone close to us, to get up in the morning. The courage to fight, to find energy, to keep moving in the face of illness and the hard roads of recovery. The courage to take a new step in a new relationship or a new situation. It even goes right to the heart of who we are, the courage to be the person we are. The courage to think new thoughts, and the boldness to speak to them, to those that matter. You know, I don't remember a whole lot from my early childhood, but I remember the first morning of grade 1. And I wasn't really a precocious child, but I do remember being scared to go and saying to my mother that I think I already knew everything I needed to know, so do I really have to go? I don't think I would have tried half the things I did as a kid, particularly not a passion like music that grew for me, had I not had someone in my life to, that very first time, drag me there. As we mentioned during the telling of that story, courage, in so many ways, is found between us. It's found in us, but so importantly, it's found between us when we're encouraged in our courage. With the strength that comes from others who aren't afraid, or maybe less afraid, or afraid of something totally different, we might be better able to have it, to engender it when it counts. That poor, well-meaning dreamer in that fox and lion story, all he wanted to be able to do is to interpret his life in such a way that he could do what was right and do what was good. He was trying. And this dreamer wanted to act according to what was good and what was right. And he sees a fox unable to care for itself and a lion who brings that fox food. But because it's the view of the world that made sense to him at the time, he interprets this story playing out before him with these animals. He interprets it that he should wait, that he should trust in whatever it is he needed to trust in. Trust that, like the fox, he'd be taken care of. And we shouldn't fault him, because it's a very comforting and encouraging thought to think, it's okay, we'll be taken care of. But instead, this parable shows us that in the reality of the world, he's got it wrong. That when he gets outside of the luxury of his own mind, his lens is completely wrong. His understanding of responsibility is wrong. His action is wrong. He's focused on the wrong animal. Being like the lion is the better way. And that's the challenge for us, isn't it? The balance between what we think and what we do. Between the thoughts we have and getting on with it. Between what might be helpful in a perfect world and what might be helpful in the life we're actually living. The truth is, thinking about where we want to act and taking a step toward doing it are two steps in the same direction. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, German pastor, theologian, and during the Second World War, a Nazi resistor, said it this way in his writings that were compiled after his death into a book called Letters and Papers from Prison. He said, "Actions spring not from thoughts taking wing, but from a readiness for responsibility." Action springs not from thoughts taking wing, but from a readiness for responsibility. That's an amazing sentiment to me, because it says that we don't just think about something, think about doing it, then do it. That it's not that easy. That we don't do it until we're ready to take responsibility for the thought and the action. The story that we told this morning of Jesus and his disciples in the boat during a storm, this story sets it up perfectly, doesn't it? There's a huge storm ready to engulf the boat. The disciples are nervous. They're looking at each other with nervous glances. And then we get the moment where we have a bit of comic relief, don't we? The comic moment that in the midst of all this stress and anxiety of the disciples, where's Jesus? Asleep. And they have to wake him up. And they don't just start yelling at him. You'd think they'd say, "Jesus, you're on this boat with the rest of us, pick up a bucket and bail." But they actually attack him personally. They say, "Don't you care? Don't you have compassion for us? We're going to die here." And they seem to be so caught up in the crisis that they worry about what their teacher is doing rather than what they've been trained to do their whole lives. They are people that know fishing and boats. They've been in plenty of storms. These are weathered fisher folk. They weren't just surprised or afraid of the storm. They've been there. They've done that. The Sea of Galilee was notorious for storms. Every day they ventured out was to engage in some risky business. So they know how to handle that. And neither were they suddenly regretting that they were surprised by the weather, or that they hadn't checked their Weather Channel app before they set out. And yet here they are all screaming and running around and scurrying and directing that right at Jesus. And I presume it's because they're afraid of themselves. They've lost their courage. They developed some sort of dependency on this guy they were following. They developed some sort of dependency on each other. And they'd lost their ability to decide for themselves, and then panic ensued. Theologian Walter Wink is helpful with his comment when he says that Jesus woke up with reproaches, not with a cry for help. In other words, he woke up with people screaming at him, "Jesus, you deal with this. You do it. You're the expert. You're the leader. You have the resources. You're failing to call upon them. Just get up and do it already." And I want us to remember that this story, like most stories in our spiritual tradition, in fact, most stories like this that have some kind of supernatural feeling kind of event to them. You know, Jesus does wake up. He calms the storm. I want to remind us that in this story, it's not about the details. It's not about the man in the boat. It's not about the storm's beginning or the storm's ending and how it came about. It's not about some kind of miracle of a storm obeying Jesus' commands. It's not about any of that. This story is about you and me, as all the good spiritual stories are. Here's a story showing us a group of people who can't figure out what they're afraid of relying on one person for everything. forgetting that they have the resources to make decisions and to take actions and to take responsibility. That it's not up to one, it's up to many. And I think this story is prompting us to confront our fears that we have of the very same things. This story is prompting us to ask, what are our dependencies? This story is prompting us to remember that we have resources with which we can take action. It's those resources that when the storms of life come rocking, which they always do, it's these resources that will save us. It's not one person that can somehow stop the storm. It's not a group of people that can somehow take away the pain or the event or the circumstances. What will save us is our ability to look inside, find our resources, and take action. It's been suggested that when social energy flows more toward hope, we find ourselves supporting policies that are more generous, more oriented toward establishing peace and justice. This is interesting that I'm now reading from a resource written in 2006, before any of our current national, international issues were like they are today, were confronting us. So when social energy flows more towards hope, we find ourselves supporting policies that are more generous and oriented toward establishing peace and justice. And on the other hand, when social energy flows more toward fear, we find ourselves supporting policies that seek to dominate others, to build institutions based on an assumption that there is not enough in the way of goods or generosity to go around. Hope in our own resources not only can help us to weather a storm, but it can help us reimagine the world. It happens starting with us, doesn't it? The world doesn't get reimagined on a global scale overnight. It happens one person at a time, and as people seek to build that courage together. Does anyone remember the show The Kids in the Hall? The Kids in the Hall was a Canadian comedy TV show. There was a guy, one of the actors, Mark McKinney, had a recurring character named Mr. Tizik who had this bit where he would crush people's heads. I'll crush you. I'm reading now from a book I thought I'd never share from, quite frankly. It's called Geek Wisdom. I'm a geek, and I will share it with you. Geek Wisdom, The Sacred Teachings of Nerd Culture. You really know me now. Courage. I am free to be a geek. Under the chapter, I'm crushing your head. It's all about perspective. Back in the days of the TV show The Kids in the Hall, Mark McKinney played a character called Mr. Tizik who would crush someone's head between his thumb and forefinger. Of course, that's not really possible unless you stand 10 feet away, close one eye, in which case, yes, their head is clearly a mere grape to be squashed between your massive, unstoppable digits. It's an illusion, naturally, but illusion is a powerful tool. This Escher-like frame of reference is used often And remember, this is a geek book, so all the references are geeky. Like when Doctor Who's TARDIS can fit an endlessly huge spaceship interior inside the door of a phone booth-sized box, because the inside dimension is a realm far distant from the outside dimension. Or think of the change of perspective when Obi-Wan Kenobi, you know we're talking Star Wars now, right? Okay. I mean, how much education do I have to do here? Okay. The change of perspective when Obi-Wan Kenobi told Luke that his earlier assertion that Darth Vader betrayed and murdered your father wasn't a lie so much as a spiritual interpretation of the truth. Getting a different perspective on things is one of the best ways there is to kick your imagination, kick your courage, kick your problem-solving brain into high gear. That's why companies hire outside consultants or take staff out of the office retreats to ponder the challenges that lie before them. And it's just as helpful in daily life. So today, I think I might just take a walk on a different route, get a new look at things, to kick my courage and to kick my problem-solving brain into high gear. Maybe I'll see something I've been missing, and that something probably won't crush my head, but it might just blow my mind. Be it a fisherman on a boat about to be swamped with water, or be it a prophet or a sci-fi character in science fiction, or a resistor of war and hate, or any of us with a need to respond to a world we find ourselves in, the courage to live begins, as they say, with one step. The courage to live begins in finding our inner resources, challenging our dependencies. Courage will be embodied in our world again, through us, through our finding our inner selves, and through a movement of confronting fear with courage. It's what we do. It's what we practice with each other so that we can go outside and do it among our friends, among those who disagree, among those who differ from us, that we will find our courage. And that we'll find it in all its forms, made manifest in us and through us in places we expect it and in places we don't. That's the best kind of courage, when we find it in the places we least expected it. May it be so for us in so many ways, not just today, but in every moment as we live this spiritual life. May it be so.